Yo, Oak Life, what is up with you? This is Chris and Greg, Greg and Chris. This is Craig back at it again with a Roots and Branches episode where we're going to be talking a little bit about continuing the conversation with, who we are as individuals and a little bit of insight to kind of our upbringing, especially with how it has played a part in our racial identity and our awareness of that. So, that being said, I'm going to jump right into it. Before I do, I also want to say this is a perfect opportunity. If you have questions, if you have thoughts, if you want to wrestle with things kind of virtually with this conversation that Craig is having, definitely be encouraged to ask questions, send thoughts, send concerns, all that fun stuff. If you want to talk through it or hear it being talked through. Cool? Right?
Cool, neat.
All right, cool. All right, so that being said, question number one, Senior Scott. How early did you become aware of your racial identity?
Yeah. It's such a good question because I think especially for white folks, we don't realize it. You're not forced to realize it, be confronted by it until something happens or there's like a moment. And I've heard and read how it's like if they track the data for us white folks, it's like way later, like sometimes into like teenage years. The first story that comes to mind for me is like the elementary school I grew up in was predominantly white. There was some diversity, but largely is like white and Asian. And there were a few black kids at our school. But then in our grade, like halfway through the year, this kid, I think his name was Isaiah, joined our class, and we all thought he was the coolest. And we were like enamored by him. And I don't remember any negative comments as like kids. It was more so like we noticed he was different, and we kind of liked like his style and vibe. But I think that's the first time that I was like, oh, what does that mean? He's like African American, he's black, like I'm not. And I think that first started like you start to process that, not necessarily knowing exactly what that means as a kid, but I think that was probably about fourth grade when that happened. How about you? Like, when did you first kind of get confronted by your own racial identity, or like, what that means?
Racial identity is such a deep question. I think more on a surface level, just race or ethnicity. More specifically, my parents. I was like 4 or 5. I had a buddy named Robert. Robert had, and Oak Lifers, if you've heard me say this story or share it, my apologies. So I'll try to keep it brief. My friend Robert, he was a little dude, blonde hair, blue eyes, wore glasses. Went over his house for dinner. His mom had blonde hair, blue eyes, wore glasses. Looked at the dad, blonde hair, blue eyes, glasses. Had 2 brothers. You guessed it, blonde hair, blue eye, glasses. And then I go home, and then I look at my my father. If you don't know, he's a black guy. Glasses. My mom is a little Mexican woman with no glasses, and I'm like, y'all don't look nothing alike, and I don't look like either one of you. Why do we look so different? And then my mother responded by saying something very clever. She said something like, your daddy and I, we like to play with colors, and that's why you are cinnamon. I was like, okay, that's awesome. And then I thought nothing more of it, at least for that conversation. And then, so that was probably the earliest memory of like, yo, this doesn't add up. Something's not right.
For sure. That's a great kind of mom comment, but something we didn't, as we're talking through things to talk about in this episode, we didn't really talk about like parenting with it all. Like, I don't think my folks ever talked to me about race.
Right.
Maybe like Oprah was on TV and she had like a panel on it and it like came up and maybe we had like but there was no intentional like moment where my parents were like, this is kind of the layout of the world and this is who we are, and that just never was there. Did you ever have that conversation? Do you ever hear parents saying like any of the like anything like that?
Not intentional. There would be like things I might hear my pop say in conversation with some friends. But I never had like the sit down, hey son, this is what you are and this is what you need to necessarily be aware of, or anything like that. It was always the, hey, do good, get good, do bad, get bad, and that'll set you straight right there. And I was like, all right, cool, you're right. That's all I needed to hear.
Yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah.
How about for you, your appearance, your racial identity formation as a kid, growing up? Were there ever any negative consequences or experiences, like negative moments, like based on that?
Directly ones that I was aware of, no. I mean, I have seen, walking down the street, a woman hold her purse a little tighter, kind of like no eye contact, look down, keep walking type vibe. I have just little minor like things, and those are not minor in a grand scheme of things, but as far as their personal impact on my life, it was just kind of I noticed it and I just kept it pushing. Negatively, I think that my mix of being Black and Mexican, that, and then being an overweight child, and having a lot of red in my pigment, people didn't know what I was. Some people thought I was Indian. Some people thought I was Pacific Islander. Some people, they just didn't know. So they probably didn't look at me with, I know what you are, therefore I will treat you as such. It was, I don't know what you are, so I'm just going to keep it pushing. I didn't really feel any type of treatment based on my ethnicity until way later in life. So as a youngster, I wasn't really aware of it.
Yeah, it's interesting that we want to categorize each other. Like there's that impulse, like, what are you? Where do you fit into my constructs in my head, so I know how to interact with you?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so interesting.
I was listening, just kind of on a tangent, that there was this one neuroscientist person that was saying that stereotyping is actually a product of our brain's way to reserve energy. So if we see something, we want to not waste energy trying to figure things out. And our body's designed for survival primarily. So it's like, hey, if I can reduce my energy with this task, let me just categorize everything that's similar. Therefore, I don't have to work hard. So like, we're unfortunately wired for that, which kind of opens up a whole new conversation, but I'll stop there. Yeah. We definitely want to categorize.
So it's like this thing that we're wired to do. And then if there's like added social pressure to magnify that impulse, you see why it's so potent. Like if, we want us and them categories. And racial appearance is an easy one to do it as a kid and stuff.
Yeah. People always used to say, I remember hearing this question saying, hey, would racism exist if, everyone over 6 years old died and the world started over or something like that? Racism is taught. It's not inherent. And I disagree. I think that the racial disparity, and I might be veering off topic here a little bit, so reel me back in, but racial disparity is a byproduct of other things. These ways that our bodies are wired, our minds are wired, our psyches are wired. And then you, like you said, you add aspects of fear, you add aspects of just kind of, lack of knowledge around certain aspects. And it just compounds into this thing that we're dealing with today. And what are your thoughts on that? Do you think that that racism, that ethnic treatment is something that is merely taught, or where do you think like the source of it is?
Power. Like at least there's a couple ways to talk about racism. I think is like interpersonal, how we look at each other, and then the systems and the cultural, the history, the momentum of history. And I think the most severe consequences are in the systemic issues, like economic institutions that benefit certain people, largely white people historically, and that piece is for sure something, maybe that there's this baseline tribalism that then those with power magnify it over others. But I would say it's mostly taught because it doesn't actually exist on like a scientific level. Like all the constructs of what is white, what is black, like these are ideas we've developed. What they're rooted in yeah, maybe there's some biological tendency that we have to have us and that. Look, when I like walk down the street and see a Yankees hat as an A's fan, like I feel something.
Of course.
So I think the lesson there is to be aware of it, be aware of how we're shaped by those things, like to catch it and like and notice it, and like inside of ourselves, acknowledge it and stop it as best we can.
Yeah. And that's a good point. I'm not saying that practices of racism aren't passed down. That's not what I'm saying. But I think like the root of it stems deeper than just a teaching or a lesson or hey, do this, follow me type thing. But no, that's good. That's really good, man. Have you felt any negative experiences based on your racial identity?
Upbringing, no. And then if there have been, it's been like discomfort because of the context we're in. It's like, oh, it's uncomfortable to be the white guy in some of these conversations.
Right.
That's kind of the extent of it. And I think it's necessary discomfort in a lot of ways. But growing up, I can't think of a single thing. Other body image things were negative, like getting bullied because of like being overweight as a kid, but not race stuff.
No ethnic challenges coming up.
Yeah, no.
Got it.
How did let's switch it to like, because we're kind of the hope is this is kind of a reflection of like how racial identity stuff was formed in us as kids, as youth, as we grew up.
As youths.
So I'll let you talk on this first and I can share my experience, but like, how about in your relationship to media, to sports, to art, to film, the majority of characters portrayed, stories told are from majority culture, from white culture.
Oh yeah.
How like growing up, did you notice that? What was that like? Yeah.
That's good. So it's a good question. I fell in love. My first hero ever, Rambo, Sylvester Stallone, good old Sly. An early Halloween, the first Halloween that we have recorded, I dressed as Rambo in my kindergarten class, and I went to the store, and I'm not the same color as Rambo, so they had, or Sylvester Stallone, so they had this costume with like a hole kind of like cut out of a shirt, and they had this fake like plastic like muscles, so it had like the pectorials and the abdomen muscles, and then you look at me wearing clearly a different pigment as my abs and whatnot, and I didn't think anything of it really. I guess in the moment I was like, hey, I'm Rambo, this is cool, like my first time cosplaying, right? And then I looked at the pictures as I got older, and I was like, oh, that was kind of lame, but it was kind of a minor thing. And then, continuing to grow older, a lot of action heroes were, blonde or Caucasian seeming. Jean-Claude Van Damme being like my first martial arts hero before I even knew who Bruce Lee was. It was just like, hey, this is just how it is. This is how it is. I didn't have anything else to compare it to. So it was like, hey, this is cool. I like it because it's cool. And that was that. And then I got heavy into like Asian culture with anime and video games, as far as like the Japanese aspect of things. And then Bruce Lee with the Chinese aspect and philosophy. So I thought that was really cool. And then there was this one character named Al Simmons, who, if you know who Al Simmons is, he's Spawn from Image Comics. And that was the first Black superhero that I was introduced to in like 94 or 93 or something. And I was like, oh, he's cool. He looks like me. His last name is Simmons, and my last name is Stewart. I tried to make all the comparisons I could. I was like, oh, he's super cool. But at a very young age, it was like I noticed it, and then I just kept pushing. So I don't know.
Yeah,
that's early though. That's early.
Sure. But it's there. Like,
yeah.
And I think that's the type of stuff that like we don't, obviously as a kid we don't realize, but I think in hindsight you start to realize, like you look back on it and say like, what does that do to like the some sort of internal perception that we all carry of our races, like that it's the good looking white guy who's Captain America always, whatever the iteration, like so we tend to see that as, I don't know, those are the heroes. So I think it's real. And I like when I've heard from like kids the first time, like the Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, right?
Young Sufi.
Yeah, there's at least one. Yeah, we know one. They like loved it. It's like, oh, he looks like me. Like, I think that's meaningful. Like, and it's, I'm glad we're starting to do more of that in culture. I don't think we're there yet, but
it's cool. I just saw a video. There was a new Marvel comic superhero heroine. I forgot her name. Shame on me, but she's from the Philippines, and there's this whole story arc of her, like her power is hydrokinesis. She controls water, and like really putting the Philippines on the map. And it's just good. It's good. And there's a whole slew of other ethnic superheroes that have come up in recent years. So it's definitely a good thing. I'm kind of going back to your mentioning of this awareness. There's this video of Muhammad Ali. So much content out right now. So much content that is like dug up from years past that is completely reflective of what's going on today. But anyway, there's this video of Muhammad Ali stating that he saw a picture of Ain't Heaven, and then he saw a picture of The Last Supper, and he's like, Mama, where do we go when we die? And she said, heaven. And he said, well, how come there's no black people in this picture? Everybody's white. And then he continued to kind of ruminate on it. And he was like, well, Santa Claus is white, and everything good is white. You know, they have white cake, and everything bad is black. If I hold something against you, I'm blackmailing you. Black cats are bad luck. The black sheep is the one who's, and he's noticing at a very young age this idea that everything associated with good, inherently good, is always attached to this color. And then everything inherently bad is attached to another color. So when we refer to ourselves as colors, then we refer to ourselves as these inherently good and bad forces. And it's thick. It's thick how much it's woven into how we interact with life.
Yeah, and so it's like that, noticing it. Like we're in a river and it's flowing this way, and if we don't notice it and like change course, we'll just get swept up in it all and not be aware of the ways that these things hit us growing up or formed us or shaped us.
Right.
Yeah. For me, like I was into comics. I was into bands and sports, and most of the music I listened to is majority white people. But sports, like some of my heroes were like not white people, like Hispanic or Black, and so I do think that there's like, I'm grateful for that to a certain degree, like having gotten windows into people's lives. Like Ricky Henderson is one of my all-time favorite A's players, grew up in Oakland, has a crazy story, and is like a really interesting human. And it's interesting, like those things are important for us to learn from other perspectives.
Heck yeah.
And so, but I never had the experience of like, there's nobody who doesn't look like me on TV or have a similar like family or that kind of stuff.
Right. So you mentioned Isaiah in the 4th grade, right?
Mm-hmm.
Was there any other moments either before or after that? And you mentioned Ricky Henderson. I'm not sure how old you were when you thought, oh, he's cool. But were there any other moments where you're like, this thing is cool, and I don't look like this individual who's representing this thing as far as art or film or sports or anything like that? Were there any other instances like that at a young age?
I do think that, like, I'm speaking just from my perspective, there was like permission or not permission to like certain things. Like I don't think I got into hip hop as much growing up, partly because like the, most of the prominent rappers, people of color, and I think that like unconsciously I was probably like, yeah, that's not really what I'm supposed to be into.
Right.
And it's kind of a bummer because there's a lot of like stuff I don't know, which I wish I did. I'd have way more street cred. But yeah, yeah. Does that answer the question?
Yeah, no, that totally does. That totally does. Because I'm thinking it was the like the exact opposite for me, because just American, I'll just say American music, and I use that term loosely, was so prominently just kind of woven into everything. Like I grew up on Guns N' Roses, Bon Jovi, Metallica, AC/DC, like because my mom liked that stuff. My mom moved to the States when she was an early teenager, and I think there's just a lure of America. So anything American, like, hey, let's get into this. And my mom was always a rebel. She was always against the grain. So like she was different from some of her sisters, and she liked rock music. So we grew up to rock music, and I just thought it was super cool. And then I come to find out that Guns N' Roses wasn't too happy to find out. Axl Rose wasn't too happy to find out that he had fans from other ethnic groups, and that's actually, at least the rumor is, that's part of the reason him and like some of the other band members kind of parted ways, because he was apparently a douche. And I was like, oh, that makes me sad, because I love Child of Mine. Sweet Child of Mine is like my favorite. It's like top 5. The little guitar riff at the end is just so good. But yeah, so it's like no one was saying I couldn't like these things, because that was really all that was on the table. Like I didn't hear hip hop until way later. But anyway, yeah, interesting, very interesting.
What was how old were you when you got into hip hop?
My first hip hop exposure was a rapper by the name of Domino. I don't know if you've ever heard of him. He had one hit wonder in like the early 90s. And I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. And then I heard some other stuff. And then it wasn't until later, because I was like early elementary. And then in junior high, Dre and Tupac's California Love was everywhere. And that was fire. And that was the first song that I memorized the lyrics of Tupac's verse, not Dre's verse, for no particular reason. And then it picked back up in high school when I got Chronic 2001 and the Slim Shady LP. And from that point on, I was like, oh yeah, this is good stuff. This is the good stuff. But
now you're a famous rapper.
Now I'm a famous rapper. Because then what's cool is once you get a doorway into the world, then you can get the history of like all the other MCs that made it, or all the other pioneers of whatever the genre is, and it's good stuff. But yeah, man, it was good. I think part of me was like, hey, I kind of have to rap because I'm not athletic. Like I could shoot a free throw, but I couldn't dribble to save my life, and I wasn't dancing. And like, there's all these stereotypes in the early 90s. Oh my gosh. So many stereotypes that like, you kind of feel like you have to live up to these stereotypes. And I was like, well, I can rhyme words. I'm gonna be a rapper because that's what I'm expected to do. Yeah. Interesting times, man.
We didn't put this question in there. Maybe we could do one or two more questions, but growing up, I asked a question about like negative experiences.
Mm-hmm.
How about positive experiences that like looking the way you do and who you are, like were there positives growing up?
I'll say as a young kid, no. I'd say none that I was aware of anyway. I know that by the time I got out of high school, people judge you based on how you speak. That's one of the categories or characteristics in which people judge your intelligence. Is the words you use, how confidently you present them, and all that good stuff. I've always had the gift of gab because of my pops. So people always was like, oh, he's educated and he's black. He must stand out, which is sad to say. But I feel like as I got older, the more education I got under my belt, the better treatment I got, which brought on a whole bunch of different conversations, because it's like, in one aspect, in business or academia, I got treated a certain way, but then all my homies would like make references to like a movie I was unfamiliar with. I was like, you ain't really black, you don't know this, blah 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 blah. So like, there's always this this kind of push and pull. Like, the more you are one way, the less you're accepted in a different realm. It's like trying to walk in two worlds at the same time. So I would say, as far as my personal struggle with my racial identity, that would be the struggle. Yeah.
The in-betweenness, like
the in-betweenness.
Yeah.
The in-betweenness. Yeah. Did you ever feel like you had to be or had to live up to a type? Did you feel like there was a caricature that you had to kind of fulfill as far as your identity is concerned?
Not racially. Like, and this is a good, like, some of those things, I don't think, I mean, there's societal pressures to be whatever, like family pressures to get good grades and be a doctor or whatever the thing is.
Right.
Maybe more on my gender, sex kind of stuff, like being manly or whatever, that, like, those sorts of things. So this is why, like, one of the things I think it's been a good process for me as a white person to reflect on is like, how was I shaped my understandings growing up? One, to note it, but then notice there's difference. Like, there for sure are like big differences between you and I and some of the experiences we had growing up. Even if we didn't have like major like moments, like conflicts or crises around it, there's still lots of subtle things that over time that add up.
Indeed.
Yeah. Yep. I can't think of anything racially there was like a pressure to be a certain way.
Right. No, that makes sense.
I've heard people say this is part of one of the white supremacy's evil in so many ways.
Yeah.
And it hurts white people too. Like, and one of the ways it does is it robs white folks of like having an ethnic culture, a heritage. Like, it's like, oh, this is just vanilla. You're just the norm, which is wrong, number one, and harmful, number two. But I guess there's just two that I can think of, but it's wrong and harmful. Totally. There's probably way more things, but it's wrong and harmful because like that's part of the racial construct is like none of these, there was no white and black exclusively. Like everybody, we used to be tribal and we had cultures and specific languages, all of us. And here in America it kind of blends. So I think, yeah, if there would have been, it would have been like how to be more Norwegian and Irish. Which doesn't, I don't know anybody who had that experience unless you're like have a direct connection to that space. Yeah.
Right. No, that's good, man. That's good. Yeah, dude, we're at the end of the day, we're really all connected. Shout out to, and this is sponsored by Nickelodeon's Avatar: The Last Airbender. If you haven't watched it, watch it on Netflix. It is so good. So many nuggets of wisdom. We are all connected, people. But anyway, in closing, let's kind of wrap this up, man. What would you say? How do we reflect on these kind of awarenesses that we're kind of digging up in this conversation, and how can we kind of counter these either negative or false or counterproductive ideas? What are some ways we can do that?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'd love to hear your take too. But I mean, just what we've been saying is like, notice it, be aware of it, do reflection. Like this, one of the conversations I think in deconstructing racism or being anti-racist is coming to terms with your own racial identity and rooting that in childhood or like early formative years, and thinking about the experiences you had or you didn't have and how that like plays out. Yeah, what do you think?
I completely agree. I think it starts. I think there's two tracks. Like when you have a wound, if I hurt myself or whatever, I have to stop said thing, right? Said ailment, and then my body has a way of kind of healing itself on the inside. And what I feed my body heals that quicker or slower. So there's like an immediate response, and then there's a kind of long-term response. I think these ideas are so deeply, deeply embedded that real progress and growth and change is a long-term game. So it's going to be a lot of various ingredients in that proper nourishment, which include things that are a little more drastic, like flipping tables, and then things that are, more short, or not short term, but more long term, and like softer. These conversations, this awkwardness, da 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 da. The immediate stuff and the long stuff, it really depends as to what your personality is and what your giftings are and what your experience is. But I think universally, we have to be uncomfortable. Universally, we have to be uncomfortable. Some of us are kind of already in that realm of uncomfort, and some of us need to step into that. But until we can all kind of share that uncomfort together, yeah, there's no. And that was very like 10,000 feet in the air response. That's how I think, man. I'm sorry, dude. I'm an airbender, but yeah,
it's good.
My thoughts, man.
It's good. Well, thanks for sharing everything, your part of your story and all that.
Indeed. Yeah, there is no one answer, man. We got to all figure it out together, But yeah, that's all I got. You got anything else? Any closing words, comments, or thoughts?
No, I'll let you got the last word. That was well said.
Cool. Well, go A's. Go Avatar, The Last Airbender. Don't watch the movie. And peace out, Oak Life. Love y'all.
All right. See ya.